then I said some other stuff. It is now Wednesday, and I hear that Russia has just declared war on Japan. This is before Japan surrendered. I believe, as Drew Pearson did last, you ever remember hearing of Drew Pearson? He was a famous radio announcer. I believe, as Drew Pearson did last fall, that the war should be over in a week. Let's see. This new bomb may sound inhuman, but the relatively few people who had been fortunate enough to have worked on the project and to have known in advance what was up, like myself, would be sorely disillusioned if the American people, or any part of them, should be afraid to face the fact that this will mean peace forever, even with the cost of several thousand of Japanese civilian lives at the present. Let us pray that it will be unnecessary to use any more even on our enemy. However, if they should doubt our intentions and refuse to give unconditional surrender, Japan may well be obliterated. Anyway, let's see, what was I guess I was 19 years old writing at home, thinking there could never be another war. Yes?
That was before we had the emails.
Yeah, well, way before emails. Now, this letter, the war was over. I'm not sure that they even censored this, because then we can now tell, all my mail had been sent unopened. And I had a girlfriend that I wanted to say a lot of things to. I did, but I couldn't tell her where I was, and she didn't know anything about it either. Neither did my mother, so.
When did the AEC, when was it changed to the NRA?
National Research? I don't know.
The Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah.
You were working with.
Well, it was a Manhattan Project. It was before there was an Atomic Energy Commission.
Yeah, the NRA, nuclear reaction. Remember they went for a lot for nuclear power later on.
Oh, later on, yeah.
Yeah.
See, this was earlier, before we knew anything about nuclear power. We didn't know atomic power plant had even been built back then.
The atomic bomb was 1945.
That's when the war ended, yeah.
Yeah. But later on they developed the nuclear bomb.
Oh, yes.
And then they went into nuclear power.
Yes.
And then there was Idaho Falls, they had nuclear subs.
And a reactor testing station up there.
Yeah.
Idaho Falls, when they had several different designs for nuclear power plants, they tested them up at the Idaho Falls station. That was in the 1950s, I think, or something.
Now, how long did you stay in these programs?
Until I could get out of the Army.
What?
Until I could get out of the Army.
That was about
1946.
46.
I wanted to go back to Vanderbilt and get my degree.
You've been keeping track?
Oh yeah, it's been a wonderful story to tell. For at least a couple of years after I got out, people asked me where I was. I said, well, I wound up at Los Alamos. So what were you doing? I was just a private. Actually, I wound up as a sergeant. I was only doing what I was told. I was told not to tell anything about it.
When did they give you permission to release something about it?
When the thing came out in Life magazine, and all of a sudden,
blew your cover.
Well, Germany knew about it before I did. They blew the cover is right. So we did have some spies, and this one Klaus Fuchs, his heart was in the right place, but he made a mistake because he gave this information to Russia, which led them very quickly to have an atomic bomb and then a nuclear hydrogen bomb as well. They would have probably gotten it anyway, because once this thing was out, physicists around the world. I could go back to one more thing I'd like to tell you about the origin of the things that made nuclear power and atom bombs even possible. There were three very important discoveries. Two of them were made by women. Most of you probably don't realize that. The first one was by a lady called Marie Sklodowska. She was born in Warsaw, Poland in about 1880, something like that. A very smart young lady, and Warsaw was controlled by communist, Tsarist Russia at the time, and she didn't like that, like a lot of college students protest. And she protested too much, and they refused, the government refused to give her help to go to graduate school. Her parents were both teachers, but she wanted to go to the Sorbonne in Paris, the University of Paris, because that was probably the most important seat of technical education in the world at the time. But she couldn't get any help from the government, so her older sister, and she worked for a couple of years to get enough money, and she was accepted to the Sorbonne and went there in probably 1890. And she went to work with a guy who was dealing with radioactive stuff without realizing what it was. You remember having radium on your watches and it glowed at night? Well, this was the thing they were trying to figure out what this was all about and so forth. And she was working with uranium as a chemist and isolated some uranium sulfate, I think it was. And it's an interesting story because she had a little bit of this in a petri dish like this, and it came time to close up the lab, and she wanted to go back to her home and fix supper for her boyfriend. This is a reasonably true story, amplified a bit. So she took this little sample, closed the lab down, and put this in a cabinet and turned out all the lights. But in that cabinet were some unexposed photographic film. You remember seeing the old cameras where they would put a sheet of film behind it, and put a hood over it, and they'd take pictures and explode something behind it? That's the way photography was being done. So it required these unexposed plates. Well, they were carefully wrapped up in something to keep light out, and she put this little sample of uranium sulfate in the same cabinet, closed the door, turned the lights out in the lab, went home and fixed supper for her boyfriend, who was Pierre Curie. He was a young student there. And they eventually got married, and it was Marie and Pierre Curie.
Did you say Madame Curie?
They met in Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were. Well, they got married after that, but anyway, that night, the next day when she went back to pull the sample out, she wanted to take some pictures of what she was doing. All those photographic plates had been exposed. What in the world did that? Well, that was the only thing that was in this cabinet was this uranium sulfate. She drew the conclusion that this stuff was giving off energy. This solid material was giving off energy. And that, she gave it the name radiation. That's where it started. Now that was the first big discovery. The next big discovery was by a man whose name was Albert Einstein. In 1909, he came up with this equation, E equals mc squared. Are you familiar with that? Well, let's see, I got something here. Oops. To talk about that. Yeah, there it is. E equals mc squared. Well, he, out of clear thinking, he had no experimental work, he came up with this equation.
Einstein?
Einstein did.
Yeah. Okay.
In 1909 or 10. And what that says is that energy is equal to mass or matter times this constant. That c is the speed of light, which is a fixed thing in nature. The numbers is 186,000. So if you square 186,000, you get a big number. What's that, 34 billion or something? And if you multiply 34 billion times a little bit of mass, like 14 pounds, you get a tremendous number, a huge number. And that E, that huge number, is equivalent in that explosion of 23,500 tons of TNT, just from a little bit of mass. So actually, when this chain reaction started and the explosion started, it blew itself apart. So the chain reaction started, and only 1.7 pounds of this 14-something was actually converted to pure mass. So it's 1.7 pounds times this number, which gives you the size of the explosion. The rest of that plutonium was spread out as radiation. and that killed a whole bunch of people, but not from the explosion, but from radiation. Anyway, that's the story on this. Huh?
When did he come up with the theory of relativity?
Well, it was all part of that. It started out with the first, what they call the special relativity, and then became relativity. But this was not accepted by the world probably until 1920, when they did some experiments that proved that this was right. That out of his clear head, which he'd come up with this thing, he was right. And they now had experiments that demonstrated that. And the relativity came out at about the same time. They're all connected. But a true, obviously, maybe the greatest genius of all times, that this was thought processes in his mind. And there's a picture of him the morning after he died. It shows his desk down at Princeton University. There's his pipe is over here, and all his papers were here, and he was working on something, trying to prove some of this stuff that hadn't been proved.
His hair was out.
Oh yeah, he was a bushman. Any questions on this? I can do a little thing that's political, I guess, but I feel like I want to do it. Japan was run by a very authoritative religious regime, Emperor Hirohito, who was a dictator, a religious dictator. Do you know the people in Japan had never heard him speak until the day that he decided, after we dropped the second bomb, the warlords in Japan did not want us to surrender, but he is supposed to have said, no, I can't go any longer letting my people be killed. So he made his first radio broadcast to the people of Japan, I think this is factual, telling them, surrender. You do not need to die for me. You do not need to die for my religion. Up until that time, we had all sorts of experience when we took over some of these islands and working our way up toward Japan, where the families would leap off cliffs with their children and kill themselves. Or the soldiers would not surrender. They would rather be blown up because they were doing this as what their authoritative religion told them to do. Now, if that has anything to do with what's going on in the world today, I'll leave that to you.
How did he tie into Tojo? Tojo was the emperor's assistant.
Well, he was the warlord.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't want to quit. They were willing. They were under the authoritative religious Hirohito. They thought they were doing well. They had all the kamikaze pilots who just ran in planes, and they were dying for the emperor. That's what they were supposed to do. Tojo was the warlord. They didn't want to quit, and they tried to isolate Hirohito, and that's an interesting story. Protect him from doing this, but he insisted. He wanted to. He was a young man, and he finally prevailed upon them and voiced a message that all the people in Japan heard: surrender. Now, one more story about that. Several of my friends came into Japan after the war to help rebuild it, and they were all surprised when they went into Tokyo, for instance, which we had firebombed and pretty much destroyed Tokyo without dropping an atom bomb on it, but it took a while to do it. The children were there waving little American flags, came up thanking our soldiers for ending the war. They were now told they didn't have to die. And that's not generally known by a lot of people back then. So, but
we had our emperor, MacArthur.
Well, I don't think he ever wanted to tell people they had to die if they could possibly escape, and they weren't told to kill prisoners they'd taken. That's not Western Judeo-Christianity. We don't think that way. But when a religious dictator is in control of people, it's awful. He tells them, the religious tells them to do awful things. like beheading Christians, usually. So that's got to change, but maybe it is, I think it is changing, but it's going to take time. We have to be prepared to help them change. That's the end of my politics. Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much. I didn't see everybody go to sleep, so that was good. But I enjoyed doing it. Thank you for letting me.
Just want to tell Ralph a special thank you for being here. This was so kind of you to come and do this, and I found it fascinating. I hope you did too. I'm sure a lot of you remember some of these events going on. So let's give him one more round of applause.
Who wants this? Who wants this? I can't eat grapefruit, so I want to give it to somebody.
I love grapefruit.
I'll eat
There you
it.
go.
Does anybody want a grapefruit? Have some plutonium for breakfast tomorrow?
It's a blast.
It's a blast.
I saw a special on